I have been a fan of basketball for many years now. And when I was in my late teens, I wanted to try and find a way to play basketball competitively. I wanted to find an opportunity to play basketball competitively. And one of the first ideas that popped into my mind was maybe I could walk on to a small school somewhere. Maybe I could walk onto a basketball team at a small local school. And so I practiced. I signed up for a couple of showcases. Didn't really do that well. Didn't get any recognition. And eventually, I had to sit down and ask myself, was it worth it? And what am I going to have to sacrifice in order to close the gap in skill between me and all these kids that have been playing since they were little, because I hadn't played that much growing up. And one of the things I knew I would have to sacrifice is time. I would have to sacrifice time with family. I would have to sacrifice time at church. I would have to sacrifice relationships. I would have to sacrifice time with friends. I would have to sacrifice time learning a skill and gaining experience in the workplace. Another thing I considered was the financial aspect of it. I wasn't going to get an athletic scholarship for walking on to a D3 basketball team, and the chances of me having enough skill to walk onto a D1 or D2 team were very slim. So I asked myself the question, was it going to be worth going tens of thousands of dollars into debt just on the off chance I get to play basketball? And after I considered all of these things, I realized that it probably wasn't the best path for me. And so I decided to go to community college where it'd be a lot cheaper. I decided to work to stay out of debt and gain as much experience in the workplace as possible. And I say all of that to say this. A small child does not have the capacity to make decisions like that. And the reason why they don't have the capacity is because they cannot weigh the pros and cons. They don't understand what sacrifice is. They don't understand the weight of the decisions that they make. They don't understand what it is to count the cost. They cannot conceptualize the future the same way an adult can. And that is why it is the responsibility of a parent to guide them down the most productive, profitable, and realistic path possible. That doesn't mean you crush all of their hopes and dreams, but it does mean that sometimes you have to steer them in a more realistic path, into a more realistic path. And whenever a child makes a mistake, we often don't really look at it as a reflection of the child. It's more so a reflection of the parent. If a child acts up in public, we don't really look at the child necessarily as if they're responsible. We kind of wonder where the parent is. If a child gets loose or away from the adults and they run out into the street and something happens to them, we don't blame the child. We ask where the negligent parent was. If a child finds a handgun in your house and injures somebody with it, we don't blame the child. We ask where the negligent parent was. A lot of different facets of society, they are set up in a way to protect children from certain decisions, and it places the burden of responsibility on the parent. These parents that are out here exposing their children to gender reaffirming surgery and that are allowing their children to be put on hormone blockers and puberty blockers, these parents are negligent. And the idea that they would allow their child to be permanently mutilated is evil. And it's especially disturbing when you consider the fact that most of these children will end up growing out of the confusion that they live in. Let me read you this article from the Daily Wire by Christina Buttons, and it is titled, "Finland's Leading Gender Dysphoria Expert Says 4 out of 5 Children Grow Out of Gender Confusion." Finland's leading expert on pediatric gender medicine says 4 out of 5 children will grow out of their gender confusion. Dr. Kaltiala, the chief psychiatrist at Tampere University, Finland's largest pediatric gender clinic, recently had an interview with the country's top newspaper about her reluctance to recommend surgical and chemical sex change services for minors who identify as transgender. Dr. Kaltiala explained that while it is important to accept the child as they are, it is also necessary to recognize that it is common for children to strongly identify with the opposite sex at some point in their lives. But 4 out of 5 children who identify as transgender will grow out of it during puberty. That's why it's wise to monitor the situation, give the child peace of mind, and treat the family's anxiety and possible related problems, said Dr. Kaltiala. Finland is considering a gender self-ID law for adults, and SETA, a transgender activist group, is pushing for the law to apply to minors. Dr. Kaltiala, who has evaluated hundreds of children and adolescents experiencing gender confusion, argues that the age limit should not be lowered. Dr. Kaltiala said, "It is common for young people to experiment with different identities and be prone to suggestion." She believes that in adolescence, the construction of identity is just underway and the final outcome is not known. According to Dr. Kaltiala, changing a legal sex marker in youth is not a simple formality, but a strong psychological and social intervention that guides the development of a young person. She said that this kind of intervention sends the message that this is the right path for the young person. The article also goes on to say that transgender advocacy groups like SETA frequently rely on the debunked affirm or suicide narrative to lobby for early medicalization of childhood gender dysphoria. Dr. Kaltiala calls the notion that hormone treatments and legal gender recognition for minors are urgently needed due to increased suicide risk, purposeful disinformation, and irresponsible. Suicidal thoughts and behavior in young people with gender identity issues are related to concurrent psychiatric disorders, not just unaffirmed gender, she explained. It is negligence for a parent to expose their child to gender reaffirming care and do irreversible, permanent damage, especially when most children will grow out of the confusion anyway. Under what other circumstances would this not be disturbing? Under what other circumstances would this be acceptable? It is more likely that parents are willing to sacrifice their children on the altar of wokeness than it is that these children actually need such drastic reaffirming care.